and what was the best bits and things like that. But just to make sure I've got the details right, can you tell me your name, when you were born, when you started with fielding, and what job you did?
Right. The name is Clarence Hack.
Lovely.
My date of birth is 3/1/31. So I'm 82 now.
Don't look a day over 60.
Yeah, and I started in fielding in 1946 as an apprentice. I smashed my hand up when I was apprentice, and then I spent a bit of time in the works, and then went on to the draw office. I got my national and higher national certificates, then went into the main draw office, and I was in there till 1960. And then from 1960 to I think it was 83, I was on sales.
That's a long career.
Yeah, at sales then. And I used to prepare quotations for extrusion presses and other type of equipment and that. And then eventually I was out on the road in the UK to local companies and things like that. And then my first overseas trip was to Dusseldorf. And I can remember that coming back from Dusseldorf with a BA Viscount, and one of the props caught fire, and let the feather it and stop it. And when we landed at Heathrow, there were fire engines following the plane up with that as we landed. I went out to Brno in Czechoslovakia for fielding for 2 years, 63 and 64.
So how old were you when you first started going travelling?
Travelling in the 60s, so I was born in 31, so I was about 30, 35 at that time, you know.
I imagine anybody else your age probably wasn't travelling to these exhibitions.
No, that's right, no. And then in 1967, I was asked to go to Australia for 8 weeks with our licensees in Newcastle, Australia, the Netherlands. And a trip was fixed up, and I flew out to Chicago. I met the representative. We crossed over the lakes, over the North America side of it, and it was Easter. So he had a cottage on 1,000 Islands. So I had Good Friday and Good Saturday in his cottage. On the Sunday, I put on a train to Montreal, and I booked a flight to Mexico, and I got a flight as economy class, because we used to travel economy class from Montreal to Toronto, but I couldn't get a flight from Toronto to Mexico City because it was a bank holiday and the planes were full. So I had to pay extra money and go first class. I was the only one in the first class compartment until 10 minutes before the plane took off. And the Canadian police came in with a man with a blanket over his shoulder, over his head, put him in, strapped him in, and waited till they called off. Took the blanket off and the plane took off, and that bloke was being deported, and he was at the same treatment as me going to Mexico City. So I said, well, there's a moral in this. If you're going to be deported, come back holiday Monday, you know. Anyway, I had a week in Mexico, and then I flew from Mexico to Sydney via Acapulco, Tahiti, Fiji, Sydney, and then I was picked up and taken to Newcastle, which was our licensee's base there, and they were big, heavy engineers. And then I was out there for, I think it was 6 or 7 weeks, and I went up as far as Brisbane and out to Perth, and Sydney. We used to go to Sydney about 2 or 3 times a week in different places. Anyway, I was out there for a long time. On the way back, I went into Thailand for a week, and then flew back home. So that was the first one for fieldings to go around the world by plane, but I wasn't the first one for fieldings to go to Australia. That was for Jock Mackenzie, who was a footer, but I went out there in 1939, just before the war, and then the war came and he couldn't get back, and he didn't get back until about 1948.
Oh, wow.
So he was out there, he was the first man from fieldings to go to Australia. Yeah.
And did he come back?
He came back in 1948, yes he did. And then since then, I mean, I've been out to South Africa, Middle East, Europe, and even in the old days across the Iron Curtain through Checkpoint Charlie, with bombing, with Checkpoint Charlie at times, you know, into East Berlin and that, and Scandinavia by the half a dozen times, you know, a lot of it. Yeah, we did a lot of travelling. And of course in the UK, and did a lot of work as well in the office. So we had a lot to do. Interesting life.
Which country would you say, did you have a really good adventure or memory from one country in particular?
If I had to go back again, and I have been back, I've been back with my wife, I'd go back to New Zealand. Because I thought that was a nice country. A bit like England 20 years ago, something much more quiet. I'd probably change it now, but it's a nice country, nice scenery, nice people. Yeah, quiet. Australia is very brash, but people like that sort of thing.
I must admit, I've enjoyed New Zealand, but it does feel a bit like England, but with better climate.
Yeah, oh yes, it gets cold up there. Mine gets very cold up there.
Yeah.
Don't make no mistake about that. Yeah.
Are there any big sales that you did that you're particularly proud of? Was there one that you thought, yes?
Well, I got involved with a 2,500 ton copper tube press for Gusel in Sweden. We sold that. We sold, I think, Cameron Iron, which I was with Ken Daniels on that job. 25 pumps, I think we sold on that. Lots of smaller presses and that, aluminium extruder presses. I went out to Dubai in, I think it was in the 70s, late 70s, I think. And I got a letter of intent for an extrusion press. That means that they're not going to give you an order, but they will place an order for you. And then when I left Fielding in 83, I think it was, 2 years later, they got an order from Dubai for that extrusion press. So, and I can remember with these people, I think they were called Al Gurre brothers, and they took me to lunch in a place of a huge room, and they sat by the side of me, and a table was brought in, and then two servants came in with a big brass tray with an enormous pancake on the top, and that was a goat underneath that. And they would break bits off the goat and give it to me to chew. And I could have a choice of drinking either milk or water, and in those days I chose milk. And then I was taken to a reception which they were having that night. Same room again, but they were full of people. And there were servants with little cups and these Arabian type teapots, you know, pouring out stuff and picking it. One mouthful at a time, you know. And then after a while I was suddenly conscious of people watching me. And there was a servant stood there, and every time I had a cup, he'd fill it up and I'd drink it. And the secret was, when you didn't want to drink, you just shook the cup. You shook your hand like that and he'd stop it. And I didn't realise that, and they all thought I was tremendously strong to drink this stuff. I can't remember what it was now, but it didn't do me any harm anyway. So,
were there any countries that you went to where it was very different? Were there any dangerous countries that you went to?
Dangerous countries?
Or any tricky situations that you were in to try and get a contract?
Yeah. One of I think one of the trickiest situations, I was with Bob Maley at that time, and we had to go to East Berlin, and we were going to be picked up by a Dutchman by the name of Peter Dan, who apparently worked for our London representatives, who handled his business in East Germany, knew the territory, and he left a message at our hotel saying he would pick us up at 9 o'clock the next morning, and he would be pick us up at 9 o'clock the next morning. Anyway, we were outside waiting, he drove up. He drove up in a pink BMW, alright? And we went through the Checkpoint Charlie into the East German side, stop, out. They searched the car from top to bottom. They searched all our briefcases. Every drawing, full-size drawing, was opened out and looked at and put back in. And we were told to go. And we went through. He drove 3/4 of a mile onto a bomb site. Left it, got out the car, so I don't know the way to this factory. So we left the car, we walked half a mile to the railway station, the taxi, went to the factory, did our business in there, got a taxi back from the factory to the bomb site, got in the car. He drove 50 yards to an office block, 100 yards office block, said, I gotta go in here a minute. And he went in there for about 5 minutes, and we were sat in his car. I said, look, I don't know what's going on, but I said, we're pretty exposed because he came back there, got in the car, we drove checkpoint Charlie, and we went through no problem. But I would think that something changed in that car during the day. You know, what it was, I don't know. But if we'd have been caught, it was, then we'd probably still be in Siberia and a gulag to this day. So I always think of that something could have happened. You know.
And I bet you held your breath all the way back.
Well, as long as we were out through checkpoint Charlie, we were all right. But to say he knew the area and then he didn't know, you see, was a bit, to me, was a bit, didn't seem right.
A bit suspicious there.
Yeah.
What would you say was your best memory of working at Fielding and Platt?
Oh, I think the best memory of working at Fielding and Platt was with the people. You know, if you had a problem, somebody would solve it for you. You know. And of course, you also, if you were sent away by Fieldings, you would never go back and say, look, I can't do this job. Because the answer you'd probably get was, look, if you can't do it, you better come home and we'll send somebody who can. And then, of course, you will have finished that, you see, you know. But the people generally, if you want to know something, they tell you, and you'd help somebody else. And yeah, that was basically it was a company. Yeah, it was a good company to work for. Very, very good company. And it's a pity it's gone. Times, and that's it.
Everyone speaks very highly of Fielding. Very proud to have worked.
Yeah, Fielding's a good company. Yeah.
What do you think of the Fielding and Platt project and what they've done?
I think it's a good thing. I think because Fielding's, it's like other companies in Gloucester, they were part of the city. They were Gloucester in a sense, and it should be recorded. You know, lots of things. They could take the line, Fielding's Engineering Company, forget them. You know, and they lose such a lot. I mean, there are companies that have gone like that have actually finished nothing been recorded for them or anything. And you sometimes see a little bit in a paper, a picture of something, and you think, oh, remember that company? Like Sissons up in Sisson Road, you know. I mean, they make wonderful steam engines and things like that. They work for cameras for years on equipment, but I don't see much about it. I see occasionally a picture of a Sisson engine, but I read nothing about Sissons. You know.
It's a shame to lose those memories, isn't it?
Yeah, and I don't know there's many people about from that work with Sissons. I dare say you could probably, if you advertise, you could probably get a few people to come along, but how many's left, I really don't know.
What do you think is the best thing about having events like tonight? Why is it important?
I think it's, my opinion, it's a very good thing. It brings people back together, and you see people here, and some you miss because they passed on. And when they passed on, some of them may have told their story, and others may have not. And there's such a lot lost. And you can never replace it. Take it to the grave, you can never replace it. Never replace it. No, it's been a wonderful company. I enjoyed it very much. I enjoyed it very much.
Do you think that you've learned anything new about Fieldings or anything's changed?
Oh yeah, there's a lot of things here that I've seen, I've never seen before. You know, the photographs and things like that. Yes, yeah, I think, well, I've never seen the photographs before. You know, I didn't know we did that. They did that, I should say. Yeah, it was I'm glad this has taken place because I think it's very, very good to do that.
Brought back some good memories.
Memories to me, and the ability to meet people again, because normally you don't meet people. You know, if I go into town, I don't see anybody from Fielding, and that at all, you know.
Have you met again people here that you're still in touch with now through the project?
Oh yes, one or two people, yes, we made contact and that sort of thing, yeah. And that's a good thing. I mean, the people out here, I don't know how many people live in Gloucester, but they've spread out quite a bit, you know. And it's an opportunity to get together. I think it's a wonderful opportunity, actually, and I think this is probably the last one, I should imagine, but unfortunately, the memories are that's amazing.
And hopefully people will still stay in touch now that they've met up again. And
yes. I'm sure they will, you know, and people watch, unfortunately, they watch the paper for the obituary, and then they turn up again, you see, and it's not quite a pleasant time, but talk about old times. I was talking about blowers in there. And of course he's very heavily engaged in China and things like that. And I said to him, well, we went out to China in 1974 in the days of Mosey talking. In fact, I've still got the little red book that they gave me with Mosey Tum's thoughts. And I was saying to him, John was one of the engineers there, Bob and myself. And we were walking around the Forbidden City there one night, one day afternoon, and we wanted our photograph taken. And we asked the Chinese photographer to take a photograph, and he didn't want to take it because he couldn't understand why we wanted our photograph taken. And we had our own camera. You see, he couldn't understand us, and we couldn't tell him, we couldn't speak the language. Anyhow, we took a photograph, and then both of them pointed to me and said, do the negotiations. And I had to try and tell this chap, and I did eventually, with a crowd of people around me, eventually, let's say, in the Minzu Hotel, and eventually after saying, trying to get the England voice, you know, they eventually said the hotel, really. And then I had to tell them the floor, because in these hotels you didn't have a reception. You went in and you were allocated a floor. And when you went up on this floor, we were on the 8th floor. There were two boys and the bedrooms. And they prepared the meals up there for you and all that. They all went to that room, nothing else. And there were some Japanese up there as well. And every now and again, we would, they'd invite us in, because we used to drink the beer only. They had like an office up there. I mean, come in for an evening and they'd give us a bottle of whiskey and this sort of thing, we'd have a chat. But the boys would open the door to see who was in there, and they'd report on what we were doing to the machinery office. So we were watched, doing it, we were watched all the time, because they would ask you next morning, what did you do last night? You see? So you just tell them what you did, and that was it. There's no good saying something else, you know.
They found out.
Yeah, it was interesting all. There you go.
And what do you think of the team that have worked on it? You know, obviously Ollie's been working on it and his volunteers. And
Pardon?
John, what do you think of the team that have been working on the project? Ollie,
well, I think they're all enthusiastic, and I think that's what's important. Because if you're not enthusiastic about anything, you don't do it properly. You must do it properly, you know.
And John and Brian have been very good doing
yes, I don't know all my name, not my sight, I tend to forget names now. I get too over that, but I don't forget faces, you know.
Well, you've got an excellent memory, remembering all your travels.
Oh, I remember a lot more than writing. I tend to write it all down, really. I write it all down.
I think you've got enough stories in there to write your own book.
Oh yeah, I can tell you some stories, but I better not.
We'll save them for next time. Thank you so much. Can I just check, are you okay if we use any bits of this to archive and
you use it, yeah, you use it. There's nothing I haven't done anything about anybody. all right.
You haven't said anything.
I'm not on film, am I? Hey?
No, that's just sitting there. We've just been having a chat. Thank you very much, Clarence. Yeah. Well,
Okay.
how would you have known that I'd have got you all tonight and recorded you?